The floats rolled through the streets of Mainz, each one a masterpiece of political satire rendered in papier-mâché and paint, each one greeted by roars of laughter and applause from crowds numbering in the hundreds of thousands. This is Rosenmontag, Rose Monday, the pinnacle of the German carnival season, a tradition older than the United States itself, a celebration where nothing is sacred and no one in power is safe from mockery. And this year, as the floats made their way through the ancient city streets, one figure appeared again and again, rendered in exaggerated form, subjected to the kind of biting political satire that Germans have perfected over centuries of carnival tradition. Donald Trump, President of the United States, depicted in ways that left absolutely no ambiguity about what the German people think of American leadership in this moment. The images from Mainz traveled instantly around the world, shared millions of times, analyzed by political commentators, and reportedly seen by the president himself, whose reaction, according to those who witnessed it, was exactly as volcanic as one might expect. To understand why this matters, why mockery at a German carnival represents something more significant than mere entertainment, requires understanding both the tradition itself and the broader context of transatlantic relations at this particularly fraught moment in history. The German carnival, known as Fasching or Carnival depending on the region, is not simply a party. It is a deeply rooted cultural institution, with origins stretching back to medieval times, a sanctioned period of reversal and transgression where the normal rules of deference to authority are temporarily suspended. In the carnival tradition, the powerful are brought low, the sacred is profaned, and political leaders are subjected to the kind of frank, unfiltered judgment that would be unthinkable in normal political discourse. The tradition serves as a kind of safety valve for democratic society, a moment when citizens can express through art and satire and public spectacle what they might not feel free to say in conventional political forums. The Rosenmontag parade in Mainz is one of the largest and most politically charged of these carnival celebrations. The city has a long tradition of using the parade to comment on current events, domestic and international, and the float designers are known for their willingness to push boundaries and to render political figures in ways that are often shocking, frequently crude, and always pointed. In recent years, as global politics has become increasingly polarized and as strong personalities have dominated headlines, the Mainz Parade has become an event that political observers around the world watch carefully, not for its entertainment value alone, but for what it reveals about how Germany, and by extension Europe, views the global political landscape. This year's parade featured multiple floats dedicated to Donald Trump and to American politics more broadly. The depictions were not subtle. One float showed Trump as a grotesque caricature, his physical features exaggerated to the point of absurdity, his hands rendered comically small in reference to the long-running joke about his self-consciousness regarding that particular physical attribute. Another showed him in various poses of chaos and destruction, surrounded by symbols of American democratic institutions in flames. A third depicted him alongside other authoritarian leaders from around the world, suggesting an equivalence between American leadership under Trump and the kind of strongman politics that Germany, with its particular historical experience, has special reason to view with alarm. The crowds responded with enthusiasm to each Trump-themed float, with applause, with laughter, with chants and jeers that made absolutely clear the contempt in which the American president is held by large segments of the German public. The images and videos from the parade spread rapidly through social media and international news coverage, creating one of those moments where the gap between how an American president is viewed at home by supporters and how that same president is viewed abroad becomes impossible to ignore. For Trump's base in the United States, the mockery at Mainz is likely to be interpreted as further evidence of foreign elite disdain for a president who refuses to play by the rules of international diplomacy, who puts America first regardless of how that posture is received abroad, who doesn't care if European intellectuals and cosmopolitan urbanites disapprove of his style or his substance. For Trump's critics in the United States, the German carnival floats provide visual confirmation of what polling data has long shown, that America's standing in the world has deteriorated dramatically under Trump's leadership, that traditional allies view the current administration with a mixture of bewilderment and alarm, and that the damage to American soft power and diplomatic relationships may take generations to repair. The particular significance of German public opinion in this context cannot be overstated. Germany is not merely another European nation. It is the economic engine of the European Union, the political center of gravity in European decision-making, and a country with which the United States has maintained a special relationship since the end of World War II. That relationship has been built on shared democratic values, on security cooperation through NATO, on economic ties that benefit both nations, and on a recognition that Germany's transformation from totalitarian aggressor to democratic partner represents one of the great success stories of the post-war international order. When Germans mock an American president at their most important political satire event of the year, when the crowds roar their approval at depictions of that president as buffoonish or dangerous or aligned with authoritarian forces, that represents a breakdown in the transatlantic relationship that has consequences far beyond hurt feelings or damaged prestige. The Trump administration's relationship with Germany has been contentious from the beginning. The president has repeatedly criticized Germany for its trade surplus with the United States, has demanded that Germany increase its defense spending to meet NATO targets, has undermined the German chancellor in public forums, and has pursued policies, particularly regarding Iran and Russia, that directly conflict with German interests and preferences. The German government has attempted to maintain the relationship, understanding that the transatlantic alliance serves German security and economic interests regardless of who occupies the White House. But the patience even of professional diplomats has been tested by an American president who seems to view allies as adversaries and who conducts foreign policy through insults and ultimatums rather than consultation and cooperation. The German public's view of Trump, as reflected in polling data collected over the course of his presidency, shows levels of disapproval that are extraordinary even by the standards of how foreign publics typically view American presidents they disagree with. These are not the normal fluctuations of approval ratings that happen when allies have policy differences. These are numbers that suggest a fundamental loss of confidence in American leadership, a belief that the United States under Trump cannot be relied upon to uphold its commitments, to act as a stabilizing force in international affairs, or to lead in ways that reflect the democratic values that the transatlantic alliance was built to defend. The carnival floats in Mainz are not creating this sentiment. They are reflecting it, giving visual and artistic form to a contempt that is widespread and deeply felt. The reaction from the Trump administration to the Mainz parade followed a pattern that has become familiar over the years. Rather than ignoring the satire, which is how most leaders respond to carnival mockery, understanding that engagement only amplifies the message, Trump reportedly became furious when shown images and videos from the parade. Sources who were present described a president who could not comprehend why he was being subjected to such public ridicule, who interpreted the mockery as evidence of ingratitude from a country that benefits from American security guarantees, and who demanded that his staff find ways to retaliate against German insolence. The notion that satire and mockery are protected forms of political expression, that carnival traditions predate his presidency and will continue long after it ends, that being subjected to public ridicule is part of what comes with being a powerful political figure, all of this appeared to be incomprehensible to a president whose relationship with criticism has always been characterized by fury and demands for retribution rather than reflection or humor. The staff scrambling that followed Trump's reaction to the Mainz parade reportedly included discussions about whether to make public statements condemning the displays, whether to lodge formal diplomatic complaints, whether to use the incident as justification for broader actions against Germany in trade or security matters. cooler heads eventually prevailed in recognizing that any official response would only draw more attention to the parade and would make the president look thin-skinned and unable to handle the kind of political satire that every Democratic leader must endure. But the internal fury, the sense of personal offense that Trump reportedly expressed, speaks to a characteristic that has defined his presidency and that has complicated America's relationships with Democratic allies around the world. The inability to distinguish between criticism of policy and personal attack, the interpretation of any negative portrayal as evidence of conspiracy or betrayal, the demand for absolute loyalty, and the rage at any perceived slight, all of this makes normal diplomatic relations extraordinarily difficult to maintain. The broader context in which the Mainz mockery occurred includes the ongoing deterioration of the transatlantic relationship across multiple dimensions. The trade tensions between the United States and European Union have escalated repeatedly during the Trump presidency, with tariffs imposed and threatened in ways that violate long-standing trade agreements, and that have forced European governments to choose between retaliating, which damages their own economies, and accepting American protectionist measures, which sets dangerous precedents for the international trading system. The security relationship through NATO has been strained by Trump's repeated questioning of the alliance's value, his suggestions that the United States might not honor its Article 5 commitments to defend allies under attack, and his apparent preference for dealing with authoritarian leaders like Vladimir Putin over democratic allies like Angela Merkel. The policy divergences on issues like climate change, where the United States under Trump withdrew from the Paris Agreement that Europe views as essential to planetary survival, on Iran, where the United States abandoned the nuclear deal that Europe spent years negotiating and that European leaders believe is critical to preventing nuclear proliferation in the Middle East, on trade with China, on relations with Russia, on virtually every major issue of international governance. The gap between American policy under Trump and European preferences has widened to the point where the shared strategic vision that once defined the transatlantic alliance has essentially collapsed. The mockery at Mainz is a symptom of this broader breakdown, a public expression of the frustration and contempt that has built up as Europeans have watched American leadership become, in their view, erratic, self-serving, and fundamentally at odds with the values and interests that democracies should share. The German carnival tradition has a particular power in this context because it represents the voice of civil society rather than official government positions. The German government, whatever its private frustrations with Trump, must maintain diplomatic relations and must seek to preserve whatever can be preserved of the transatlantic relationship. The carnival provides a space where the German people can say what their government cannot, where the accumulated frustration and fear and contempt can be expressed without diplomatic consequences, and where the judgment of ordinary citizens on the state of the world can be rendered in forms that are impossible to ignore or to spin. When hundreds of thousands of Germans gather in the streets to laugh at and jeer at depictions of the American president as a dangerous clown, that sends a message that no diplomatic communiqué could convey with equal force. The particular genius of political satire, and the reason why authoritarian leaders hate it and why democracies must protect it, is that it strips away the pretense and the spin and the careful language of official discourse, and gets directly to an emotional and often uncomfortable truth. The Trump floats at Mainz were not making sophisticated policy arguments. They were not engaging in the kind of balanced analysis that think tanks and foreign policy journals produce. They were expressing a visceral judgment, a gut-level assessment of what the German people see when they look at American leadership in this moment. And what they see, as the floats made painfully clear, is a leader they view as unworthy of the office he holds, as dangerous to the stability of the international order, and as fundamentally at odds with the democratic values that should unite the transatlantic alliance. The historical echoes in this moment are impossible to ignore, particularly for a German audience with acute awareness of where contempt for democratic norms and the celebration of strongman politics can lead. Germany's 20th century history has left that nation with a particularly sensitive antenna for the warning signs of democratic breakdown, for the rhetoric that scapegoats outsiders and glorifies violence, for the personality cults that elevate leaders above institutions and laws. When Germans see similar patterns in the rhetoric and behavior of an American president, when they see attacks on the press, on the independence of the judiciary, on the very concept of objective truth, their alarm is not merely about American domestic politics, it is about the stability of the global order that was built in part to prevent the kind of catastrophic conflicts that Germany itself initiated in the last century. The Carnival tradition allows Germans to process these fears through humor and satire, to transform alarm into mockery, and to assert through laughter and art a refusal to treat authoritarian tendencies as normal or acceptable. The Trump floats at Mainz were saying, in the language of political satire, that the German people see what is happening in American politics, that they recognize the danger, and that they will not pretend that this is normal or that the transatlantic alliance can continue unchanged when one partner has abandoned the democratic values that were supposed to be the alliance's foundation. The international media coverage of the Mainz parade has varied significantly depending on the political orientation and national context of the outlets covering it. European media generally treated the story as confirmation of what polling data and diplomatic reporting had already established, that Trump is profoundly unpopular in Europe and that his presidency has damaged American standing in ways that will not be easily repaired. American media coverage has been more divided, with outlets sympathetic to Trump either ignoring the story entirely or framing it as evidence of European elitism and anti-American sentiment, while outlets critical of Trump have used the images from Mainz to illustrate the damage to American prestige and credibility abroad. The social media response has followed similarly polarized lines, with Trump supporters sharing the images as evidence that the president is standing up to foreign critics who have always looked down on America, and Trump critics sharing them as visual proof of the international humiliation that the presidency has become. The competing narratives speak to the deeper reality that there is no longer a shared factual foundation on which Americans can even agree about what is happening, let alone about what it means or what should be done about it. The long-term consequences of the breakdown in transatlantic relations that the Mainz mockery symbolizes are difficult to predict with precision but certain in their general direction. When allies lose faith in American leadership, when they conclude that the United States cannot be relied upon to honor its commitments or to act in ways consistent with shared democratic values, they begin to make alternative arrangements. European leaders are already discussing strategic autonomy, the development of European military capabilities that do not depend on American participation, the creation of economic and financial systems that can operate independently of American-dominated institutions, the building of relationships with other global powers that can partially substitute for the transatlantic partnership. These are not changes that happen overnight, and they are not changes that European leaders particularly want to make. Understanding that the transatlantic alliance has served European security and prosperity well for 3/4 of a century. But when the American partner in that alliance is led by someone who European publics view with contempt, when the policy divergences become so wide that shared action on major issues becomes impossible, when the very language of shared values and common purpose that once defined the relationship has been abandoned, the pressure to develop alternatives becomes irresistible. The mockery at Mainz is not causing these changes, but it reflects the emotional and political reality that makes them inevitable. The Trump presidency will eventually end, whether through electoral defeat or term limits or other mechanisms, and future American leaders will attempt to repair the damage to alliances and to restore American credibility in international affairs. But the lesson that allies learned during the Trump years, that American commitments are only as reliable as the next election, that the transatlantic alliance can be torn apart by a single American president who does not value it, that the democratic norms and institutions that were supposed to constrain executive power can be eroded if a sufficient portion of the American electorate is willing to support that erosion. These lessons will not be unlearned. The float depicting Trump as a dangerous buffoon, cheered by hundreds of thousands of Germans in the streets of Mainz, is not just a commentary on one man or one presidency. It is a marker of a historical moment when the international order built after World War II, built on American leadership and transatlantic partnership, began to come apart in ways that may prove irreversible. The question that remains, the question that the laughter in Mainz cannot answer, is whether American democracy retains the capacity to correct course, to learn from the damage that has been done, and to recommit to the values and relationships that made the United States a trusted partner rather than an object of international mockery. The carnival tradition teaches that laughter can be a powerful political weapon, that satire can speak truths that diplomacy cannot acknowledge, and that public ridicule can sometimes accomplish what reasoned argument fails to achieve. But laughter alone cannot rebuild what has been destroyed. That work will require Americans to look honestly at what has been done in their name, to understand how the nation is viewed by those who once counted themselves as friends and allies, and to decide whether the path forward leads toward renewed commitment to democratic values and international cooperation, or toward further isolation, further breakdown, and further confirmation of the judgment that the German carnival floats rendered with such brutal clarity. The floats will be dismantled after the carnival ends, the crowds will go home, the streets of Mainz will return to normal, but the images will remain, circulating endlessly through the digital networks that now shape global consciousness, available to anyone who wants to understand how a nation that once liberated Germany from totalitarianism is now viewed by Germans who gather in their hundreds of thousands to laugh at the spectacle of American democracy in decay. That is the real story of the mockery at Mainz. Not that Germans made fun of Trump, but that they had such good reason to do so, and that so many Americans either cannot see those reasons or refuse to care.